panel today that we're focusing on the two infrastructure broadband programs you might have heard of. We have Treasury's Capital Projects Fund, $10 billion here with Joey Wender. And then on my left is $42.5 billion with NTIA's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. Both these programs are very historic, going to be instrumental in building out networks to help bridge the digital divide for our country's future. So I'm pleased to be joined by both of you today to hear your perspectives on how the programs are running. 1 year that you've been, Joey, you were with us last year at our summit and had a really great conversation, but really happy to have Evan with a big responsibility on his plate in the next few months and years ahead to hear kind of how that program's shaping up. But I'll turn it to you guys just to introduce yourselves briefly, provide our audience with a little background on your programs, and we'll get started. I'll go to Joey first.
Great. And again, there was a time when $10 billion was a lot of money. So, Joey Wender, director of the Capital Projects Fund. I've been there for over a year now, and in a former lifetime, I worked for Senator Ed Markey for about 10 years.
Great. Evan?
And Joey, I feel your pain. There was about an 8-month window where 42.5 was the biggest commerce program, and then the Congress passed CHIPS, and suddenly it's like I'm nobody walking around the Clark building or Clark Hoover building. But no, I've done a bunch of different stuff. I was in the private sector, nonprofit, think tanks, last 2 governors of Virginia, campaigns. I'm sort of a generalist by specialization, but have gotten a little more expertise in broadband, and they thought I was the right person to take on the BEAD program, and it's working well so far.
So I'm curious. This is a question really for me, and I think for our audience it would be interesting to hear. I didn't include this on our questions, so let me
We're going rogue.
throw you a curveball. I want to know, what's your day-to-day like? Being a government administrator of a huge program, what's it like overseeing everything, who you're in charge of? Just give us a perspective of what a day looks like in your lives.
Sure. My day is spent talking to people and in meetings and on phone calls. I mean, it's a challenge to run any program, right? It's particularly a challenge to run a program that's never been attempted before on this scale, where we're providing, for the most part, grants through states to private companies to incentivize them to build broadband with the hopes or with the expectation that we will complete the job of providing access to all Americans. So I'm talking within my team a lot of the day, and a lot of my day I'm talking externally to stakeholders, whether that's industry, whether that's state broadband leaders, whoever it is. So it takes a lot of work it takes a lot of coordination, I should say, to run a program like that.
I'll ask Evan that, just to follow up on that real quick. From your experience working on the Hill, Senator Markey's office, anything you're taking from that previous job that has helped you in your role?
I mean, a lot of things have helped me in this role from that. I mean, besides the fact that we worked so long when I worked for Senator Ed Markey on commerce issues and on broadband. But I think the thing that helps the most is, I'm still organizing in a sense, right? When I worked for Ed Markey, I was an organizer, right? On a policy level, and we're trying to pass bills or work through committee and on markups. Well, now we're organizing states and working with states to ensure that they follow our rules, that they abide by our 100 symmetrical rule, right? That all the providers participate in ACP. So, it's a different perspective. You're looking at a different way, but it's a lot of the same skills that I learned on the Hill.
Yeah, thanks. And Evan, I guess to you too, your kind of day-to-day, what you deal with at NTIA and kind of all the layers that you kind of coordinate.
Yeah, well, I think Joey nailed it in general and specific. Because we too are it's a startup, right? I mean, there is no person who had this job before. There is no person on my team who had their job before. It's all new. And so I also began my career in organizing work, and it isn't that different, right? You're fundamentally, it's whether you're building enough momentum inside the building or inside the team to get yourself over the finish line, or you're out in the world trying to make sure that everybody's, if not rowing in the same direction, rowing in sort of the same 30-degree cone, so it comes out in the wash. That's pretty similar. So it's a lot of like, I mean, day to day, it's, first wake up, launch my family out of the house because I work from home most days, and then as soon as they're gone, I can do some work, and then I've got about an hour to respond to stuff that's happened overnight, and then a ton of different coordination meetings. I mean, we've had to build a team across the whole country, and so just the amount of HR that generates is pretty significant. And then also hearing those updates, trying to keep track of 50 states and 6 territories and the staff in them, and where we've got issues right now, a bunch of them are in legislative sessions, and so there's sort of a rolling update related to that because we got to make sure they don't get crossways with our programs so that they can continue to implement them. And then a lot of travel. So when I'm not at home or in the office, I'm out on the road, and sometimes that feels like a lot because I'm out meeting with people, but at the same time, if I went to a different state every other week, it would still be 2 years before I'd set foot in every one of them. And so in a very real way, what has been a somewhat punishing travel schedule is inadequate. And so we're trying to balance those two things.
And I think it's unique, Joey. Your program had started pretty much last June in terms of awarding money out to the states. So you guys have kind of had a foot up in the process of knowing how things work, how some things might not work at the state and local level. Is there anything kind of best practices from your program that you've been sharing with Evan as his program's kind of moving forward to being implemented, getting its awards out, in these next few months?
Sure.
That you're sharing back and forth?
We share a lot, first
Yeah.
of all, and there's been a high level of coordination between the two agencies. Both Treasury and Commerce have had the exact same incentive to educate state broadband leaders, to educate states how they were going to roll out plans that were to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially billions of dollars when you're talking about BEAD. When I started this 14 months ago, my biggest fear, which I think was right placed at the time, was there were a lot of states that lacked any experience on this. And you said to yourself, how is this going to work? Right? Because ultimately what Congress did in my program, and the same thing with BEAD, is the pendulum has swung. Whereas if you think about BTOP, these were federally designated awards. The feds decided where the money was going to go. Well, now the pendulum has swung, and Congress, in its wisdom, I think rightfully, has put the states in charge. And they're the ones that are addressing the critical needs that exist in their own states. They know their demographics. They know their communities. They know their topography, the suite of providers that are there. But when I started, it was a big worry that whether a lot of states were going to be able to handle this. And I think it's because of efforts at Treasury and all of our outreach team, because of Commerce. They have an FPO for every state, and they run the SBLN, which is the State Broadband Leaders Network. You've got all sorts of other stakeholders out there that have hosted conferences. I know Catherine DeWitt is in the back. Pew has done a tremendous amount of work with many states. And the education level that has happened over the last 14 months it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. So now my fear is not, oh my God, are these states going to be able to do it? Now it's an excitement that we're getting in really good plans. And it's very clear, not only has that education level risen, that these states are talking to each other and that lessons are being learned. So in the end, it's not necessarily lessons that Evan and I are sharing. It's as if we're facilitating an environment where states can share lessons with each other.
Yeah.
Because in the end, they're the drivers.
I think that's really important too, is that people tend, not incorrectly, from one perspective, to focus on, all right, between the two of us, we're pushing out, $53 billion worth of new infrastructure. Awesome. And I don't want to minimize that at all. We shouldn't. That's a heck of a lot of stuff that's going to get out there and do a lot of good for literally millions of American families. At the same time, though, our programs are going to close up shop. Joey and I will move on to wherever, whatever the future holds at some point. The the intellectual and human infrastructure that we have now built inside of state governments is going to persist. And there is now a universe of government engagement with the telecom sector and with this as critical infrastructure that I think is a really key deliverable of our programs that's not often discussed. I mean, those offices are going to keep providing value for their states way, 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 way after we're done talking about CPF and BEAD.
Yeah, that's really good. I guess along that line, we've been hearing today a lot on oversight, how these programs are being implemented, make sure that the taxpayer money is not going to waste, right? So I guess one part of the question for you, I'll start with you, Joey, first, with the Capital Projects Fund really pushing for fiber speed requirements, 100 down, 100 up. How is Treasury handling the enforcement of that when you're awarding projects and overseeing that and being kind of what that role is looking like so far for you? I know you announced last week half the funds pretty much been awarded, 33 states. So if you can share a little bit of how Treasury.
We did one today, so it's 34.
We did one, 34.
South Carolina
Oh,
today.
wow. My state. Congratulations.
185 million.
That's great.
We did a great announcement with Jim Clyburn this morning.
Very nice. Commissioner.
Yes.
That's very good. So yeah, just along those lines, how you're envisioning Treasury overseeing the projects, how they're enforcing the requirements with state and local governments, and how that process is going to kind of play out in the next couple of years.
Sure. Great question.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a robust reporting and compliance regime. States are going to have to report to us on a quarterly basis. Essentially, how's it going? Right? The deliverables, performance, outlays, they have to show us all of that. And they're going to be providing to us, which is when we get to the mapping portion of this conversation, I will be quiet and I will let Evan handle all of those questions. But I should say that we are going to have states be providing to us every location, lat and long, that is served with CPF dollars, with Treasury dollars. Because all that information that we're going to collect is going to feed in. Well, it's not your map.
They're going to provide it to us too.
Exactly, to you and to the FCC. The other thing I would say about our leverage and our reporting process is we announced, as an example, we announced an award of $185 million to the great state of South Carolina this morning. We did not cut a check to the great state of South Carolina for $185 million this morning. We awarded them that money, but we gave them a check for zero. The money still sits in Treasury's bank account. Well, we literally are the bank of the government, but it sits within the Department of Treasury. The way the program works is it's a reimbursement program. They get reimbursed as construction happens. It's similar to the highway program at the Department of Transportation. So, and I don't like to say this, but it is an implicit reality of our program, is that if states were to come out of compliance, we would have to have conversations about whether they would be able to be paid.
That's great. Evan, I guess.
But I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
right? It's
right.
a walk softly and carry a big stick. But yes, we hold the money, so they have to stay in compliance.
Yeah. And Evan, to NTIA's BEAD program, that we've seen with the NOFO and INCOMPAS was really instrumental in pushing a lot of our points and trying to get it included in the language on fiber future-proof speed requirements.
You guys
as well.
did well there.
So we really appreciate NTI's, being as receptive to hearing our positions and taking meetings with us. I think we have going forward is how much flexibility and guidance are you providing to the states to push for some of those? They're not actually required. Some of them are more, you would love to see it be part of the funding as they're awarded out to the states. But if you could speak to that flexibility or guidance that NTI is providing.
Yeah, so a lot of guidance, never enough, and that's okay. We appreciate states and other stakeholders' hunger for greater explanation and more detail on how we're going to approach the many supply chain, workforce, timing, grants, rules and regs, other technology types, etc. Questions that people ask. But we're also, we've got more than a dozen people full-time churning out TA and technical assistance, and so we're generating that as quickly as we can. In terms of flexibility, right? I mean, what we've built is a program that, speaking to Joey's point about the pendulum having swung, that is extraordinarily different in model from prior federal efforts, in that it is state-led and it encompasses this concept of kind of a three-linked chain that are irrevocably joined together: federal with state, state with local and tribal. All of those are a required piece of this because we simply can't sit in a building here in DC. There are a lot of nice ones, but that doesn't help us actually find the right ISP for the right community with the right amount of funding. It works much better when you've got somebody closer to the ground who's then themselves working with somebody who's even closer. And so, we built this very broad set of guardrails so that Alaska can implement the Alaska solution and Arizona can implement the Arizona solution. Recognizing that opens us up to some risk, right? It would be compliant for Arizona to implement the Alaska solution. The way we hedge against that is to have this really robust set of TA and then also have individual federal program officers who are serving both Arizona and Alaska to help guide them on the thing that makes on the path between those guardrails that make the most sense. When you're talking about flexibility, we've got even more than those broad guardrails would suggest. We've been very clear with states that my boss, Assistant Secretary Davidson, is very open to hearing why somebody needs a gate put into one of those guardrails. That something we wrote, we can't change the law, the statute's the statute, but something we've put in the NOFO is we can be persuaded that that's not a good fit for a given state or territory. And these states and territories are in very different postures, right? What works in American Samoa is going to look really different from what works in Western Massachusetts. And we have to be open to that. And we also can't have this, we got to have a little intellectual humility, right? We can't perfectly predict the future or the needs of these states. Instead, we've got to hear from them what we got right and what we got wrong. And then we can be persuaded and try to be reasonable people when it comes to being persuaded.
So for our members, building out fiber, we represent a lot of also fixed wireless satellite, but our big push is fiber.
Ours too.
And we want,
As is ours.
Yeah. And I know, Joey, your program has been great in kind of setting that as the standard. I think for our members, the Buy American provision is going to be a concern. We hear that, and I know NTIA put out a blog a few weeks back saying the administration's sticking firm to not giving a temporary, waiver. How do you see NTIA working, I guess, with that kind of position, knowing that supply chain issues are still a big part of the industry? Telecom providers are going to be facing it for months, years, who knows how long, but how that's going to impact all the funding that's going to be awarded.
Yeah, so we've got two values that are in tension. We want, and I'm sure everybody in this room wants, significant expenditures of taxpayer dollars to be spent when you need something from the private sector to be spent with American businesses, right? I mean, that's if we have a choice, we would like, that's where our taxpayer dollars to go. At the same time, we recognize this very significant urgency in getting connectivity to these homes and businesses. I mean, this is not just about people being able to watch Netflix, though I also don't think we should be minimizing that, right? People's connection to the broad social zeitgeist is important for our society. But, this is about whether or not people can participate in the modern economy, whether people can avail themselves of telehealth, whether kids are going to have better or worse educational outcomes by the millions. Mm-hmm. And so there is a significant interest in making sure that we can do this as quickly and as effectively and efficiently as possible. And so, we're going to work to get out some very specific guidance around how people should engage with, in the context of the BEAD program, the Buy American, Build American provisions. And we're going to have that out as soon as we have it nailed down candidly inside the agency, which we're still batting around, both internally and then, with some folks who care about that across government. We've got to come to a good accommodation there.
Yeah. Joey, anything on that provision that Treasury's dealt with and can help with?
Buy America provisions don't apply to our program because our funding was part of the American Relief Bill, which was a COVID relief bill, and so Buy America was waived.
Okay, so you didn't deal with that. I guess if you could share, I'll start again, Evan, on the BEAD program, any advice to our builders, our providers, in terms, we're hoping to, we're continually having those conversations with state broadband offices. I think that's the big start, building those relationships.
That was what I was going to say first.
Anything on top of that for our members to be doing before the June deadline of getting the money out to the states. And then how kind of the mapping effort is included in that, and submitting data and collecting that at the FCC, how that's going to impact kind of your work.
Yeah. So I mean, a few things. First, obviously, if you're an ISP and you're operating in a state and you're not on a first name basis with that state broadband office director, that is a mistake that should be amended immediately. Second, there are going to be a lot of different opportunities for everybody, not just ISPs, but ISPs, people in the supply chain, people in the workforce pipeline, people on the customer side, and everybody in between, to engage really meaningfully with the development of these programs. And I when I was talking about those broad guardrails, what lane a state picks for a given aspect of their implementation of BEAD can have a very significant impact on who and how building occurs, and then where it happens. And so engagement with the FCC maps is good. Engagement with the state challenge processes is arguably more important from the question from BEAD implementation, because those state-run challenge processes, separate and apart from the FCC challenges, are what's going to ultimately put out an output that is, okay, these are the places we are going to connect via newly funded infrastructure. There will also be a significant stakeholder engagement process run both by, either in concert or in parallel, our staff in the states and the state broadband office directors. And that is going to be about developing input into what the rule sets and scoring rubrics will be for project selection. Obviously, if you're hoping to have projects selected, it would behoove you to be at the table when those rules are generated, and to put in comment, written or verbal, at a stakeholder engagement session or both, so that you can have your views and the views of your members expressed in each of those instances. And so for big multi-state companies, I apologize, you're going to have to engage in that multiple times. That's the price you pay for having been successful enough to operate in a bunch of different states. But at the same time, that's an opportunity too, because your business may be different in different states. And we also have to recognize, again, that the state's challenges and approaches are going to be different. And so we want those to be tailored specifically to the needs and current network posture of those states.
Joey, you can answer that too, but I'll give you it in another way. So since you're awarded the projects already to different states, any advice for members in those states, if they haven't applied yet, what can be done to get involved in the application processes, and any updates on future awarding projects that you're seeing?
Sure. So again, the mapping is not relevant to our program, because our allocations were set by statute, by a formula that was put directly into the statute. That being said, I think it is imperative. What Evan said is entirely correct, that if you're, as a member, if you're not on a first name basis with your state broadband leader in your state, you're behind. Now, the good news for our money, even though we've awarded the money to 34 states, most states are now gearing up to put those awards out for bid, right? They're going to be requesting bids from providers that are in the states. And so your opportunity is coming very, very soon. And we know for a fact that there are a handful of states that will be breaking ground, that have already broken ground, and will be moving in 2023. I would anticipate a lot of states to be breaking ground and taking advantage of the 2024 construction season, right? They will run their bids throughout this year with the expectation is that, I mean, this is particularly for the northern states, once the ground thaws, the digging begins. So think, early 2024. So the opportunity is very ripe right now for all of your member companies to be talking to your state broadband leaders, because bids, projects worth tens, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars are being put onto, put out right now.
Yeah. And Evan, if you could share any kind of timeline. I know June 30th, I guess, is the date we've been hearing with the mapping. how things kind of look still around that date and then beyond, if there's any update you could share.
So we have a very, very, very high confidence that Alan is going to make allocation on June 30th. And then it is going to be up to the states when, over that ensuing 6 months, they get us an initial proposal. And so those initial proposals you can imagine as sort of the blueprints of the program that they're going to run. It's what's the current strategy? What is the nature of your current issue to the best of your knowledge? What are the gating criteria and scoring rubrics by which you're going to determine who you're going to fund for both deployment project, which is to say infrastructure, and non-deployment, which is under the big umbrella of digital equity. And then how are you going to operate your state challenge process? What's the rule set by which you're going to do that? They will then submit those to us sometime during that 6-month period. If we have previously, they can get us their challenge process earlier than they get us their full initial proposal. And if states have previously gotten us their challenge process, we can approve that and they can run that the moment they've submitted the rest of their initial proposal to us for review and ultimate approval, which means that you could have over the summer states beginning to run their state challenge processes. That would then allow them to get that to us, their initial proposals approved, we approve that. They can open up subgrantee selection this calendar year. Now, not a lot of states are going to be able to do that. That puts them on a very punishing time frame. It assumes that we can review some quite large documents pretty quickly, but I think you'll then see the balance of those states' subgrantee selection processes opening up in kind of the middle of next year, and that's when people should be planning to have engineered projects to attack, specific project areas in each state as they move forward.
Yeah.
But I think this is where the two programs interact, or where the two programs coordinate. You think about the Treasury money as a smaller wave, and the BEAD money is the larger wave that's going to come following it. And when we're saying to states, and what we're coaching states on is, you should have a holistic plan, right? There's clearly multiple sources of federal funding. This is how Congress set it up. And so you're thinking about how to spend our money. That's great. But the best states, which now is most of them because they've been coached so well over the last year, they have a plan for, even though they don't necessarily know exactly what their allocation is going to be from the BEAD program, it's okay. CPF or Treasury money is going to be going here. Commerce money is going to be going here. This is holistically how we're going to get to universal coverage in the state. I mean, we're hearing that more and more from states have a full plan of attack about how they're going to use this full universe of dollars to solve the digital divide in their state.
Yeah, and we explicitly want to see that from states in their BEAD plans. It's not just about what are you going to do with BEAD dollars. It's about how are you going to braid together all of these different streams of federal funding to get every single home and business in your state a meaningful connection.
Oh, great. A two-part question, kind of looking back on this past year, any takeaways, anything you've learned that if you could change, you would do differently now that you've experienced and run the program? I know it's kind of hard to say a regret, but anything that you could look at and say, if I knew that, I would have done that probably a little differently.
I mean, I think again, I go back to what I said earlier. I can't take away all that I worried about states, right, not being able to do this. I probably needed to worry a little bit less about it and have more confidence that states would catch up in terms of the learning gap. But I think that's to me the story of the last year, is how quickly states have caught up. I mean, ultimately what Evan said is right. I mean, states are the drivers, and we have entrusted states to figure out how to solve the digital divide in their own state. Everybody's different. Every state is different. And that has been, I don't know if that's the regret, but I would say that's probably the most fun and rewarding part about the last year, is watching how each individual state is tailoring their own programs to address their own critical needs. It's been terrific to watch. And it's going to be super fun watching them put the money to use and actually connecting these locations.
That was my second part. What you look forward to the most in the year ahead?
Yeah,
Where
I mean,
you want your-
finishing,
yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, we have states that have broken ground. That means that locations will be served soon, right? And we're going to have more and more and more locations. At this point, we've awarded 5 of the $10 billion. States estimate that will connect 1.4 million locations. 1.4 million locations are going to have high-speed, affordable internet as a result of our funding. And that's only half of our money. That's incredible.
Evan, yeah, same question to you. Kind of looking back the 1 year, what you learned, or any takeaways that if you could have done differently, you would.
Yeah, I mean, a few, right? The first was, I was coming out of having served 2 pretty high energy governors, which meant it was a pretty high energy job. They called me on a Friday and said, you can start Monday or 2 weeks from Monday. And I said 2 weeks from Monday. And I really should have started that next Monday. If I could have 2 weeks back right now, I would take it. But I also think getting smarter on federal hiring earlier would have been, they pitched it to me like, oh, you get to build your own team as if it was a perk. In fact, navigating federal hiring is incredibly challenging. But I think, and getting smarter on that earlier would have saved me some headaches. I mean, those are kind of my big takeaways. There's some onesie twosie stuff, right, about what states need what, and specific inquiries that we could have moved farther up in the queue because they were more popular than others. But broadly operationally, I actually think we're in a really good place. We're still ahead of any of our project timelines. Like we're not pushing any of our tech enablement. We're not behind on any of the fairly aggressive timelines that are being driven, in particular by Secretary Raimondo, who never sees a program and says that's great. Always says, give me 5 different ways you could be doing this better. Which is great, which you want, right? And then she supports you in taking that on. But yeah, I mean, I think getting started earlier, it would have been the best thing we could have done because there's just a lot in front of us.
And then looking ahead, a year from now, where do you want to see the BEAD program and what you're doing, and you feel like it's success?
I mean, a year from now, every single state in the union will have a well-designed plan, less their specific subgrantees who will be building the thing. But every single state and territory in the union will have a very clear plan for how they're going to use their specific allocation and other state funds to close the digital divide permanently and for everyone. And that is both mandatory as the program is designed, but will also be, an incredible accomplishment that's worth celebrating.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as a trade association representing a lot of different companies and technologies, we certainly want to be part of helping your offices be engaged in those conversations with the state and local governments, how important that's going to be, as well as your offices here in DC. So look forward to having those working relationships ongoing, but we want to be that resource for you to always reach out if needed.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to take a few questions from the audience, kind of open it up a little bit, make it interesting. Yes, sir.
Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. Thanks for being great, very educational panel to have the 2 of you together. Talk a little bit more about this point of how the 2 programs come together holistically, particularly given your benchmark of 100 by 100, your benchmark of 100 by 20, and also if you could speak to, and maybe this is one of the same question, but how cities and areas that may have service, but it's either not affordable or it's really sketchy if the speeds are considered, which obviously is a big issue you didn't really get a chance to talk about. So how do you kind of view these 2 metrics and the geographies going together?
Bill, you want to start?
Sure. There's a lot there. Thank you, Drew. Well, a couple of thoughts off the top. It is true. There's 2 big distinctions. Well, there's a lot of distinctions between the 2 programs, but you've identified one of them, which is the speed standard. The other difference that I think is worth noting in this room is that our funds expire at the end of 2026. They expire. Remember, these are COVID relief dollars, and the intent was for them to be put on the street within 5 years. And so even though a match is allowed by law, our money is allowed to be serve as a match for BEAD money. What we're saying to states is, because of the timeline, don't wait, right? You should look at the entire map in your states and determine, okay, here are all of the areas that need to be served. Here are all the areas, I should say, that need investments. Use our money first, start plugging the holes, and then the BEAD money will come later and essentially finish the job because of the timelines being different.
Yeah, I mean, we work really, I'm sure if you got any two federal people up here and said, how do your agencies work well together? They'd say, great, right? But it is actually true that we coordinate very closely. We're talking minimally weekly, and often I don't think there's been a week where it was just once, not always me and Joey, but people on our teams. The two standards I don't think are a bad thing. The reality is that, the BEAD program is going to fund both fiber and wireless deployment approaches. And some of those wireless deployment approaches, would struggle to get to 100 symmetrical. And so, what we want to see is folks hitting our benchmark. Now, that said, we always want to see the fastest, most scalable, highest quality projects that we can. And that's why we say, all things being equal, a fiber project is the priority project. You did pack a lot of questions in there. So we talked about that. We talked about timing. Was it speed? Well, so I just addressed speeds a little bit. Sure. So the thing to talk about, I won't necessarily adopt your characterization as fake speeds, but the thing that I would say is our colleagues at the FCC are implementing an incredibly challenging endeavor, which is to first identify every single home and business in the United States and her territories. That on its face is a very challenging enterprise. And secondarily, to put a coverage layer on top of it that has to follow a set of rules. And I think, like anybody else, you can Monday morning quarterback that, but they're implementing their statute and their statutory requirements, which are, by the way, predate the BEAD program. So, they've got to do what they've got to do per the law that they've been handed. Recognizing that law was not written by prescient people, and that BEAD has a set of different considerations. We have created a lot of guidance and more forthcoming around what the state challenge processes will look like, which is the state's opportunity to apply their own policy lenses to both existing data and a wide variety of other data sets that they can pull in to determine what, for their purposes and in their judgment as a state broadband office, validated by us, is a served, underserved, or unserved location.
Marianne?
Hey, thanks so much for being here. One thing as I think about the deployment of this funding and the folks who are actually going to be building the networks, something that we haven't addressed today, permitting and locates. Some of the really hyper-local issues that are going to need to happen ahead of the deployment of these networks. How are you guys helping the states kind of think about the influx that they're going to be having on these pretty fragile systems that every community has set up?
So we've got a really robust permitting. I'm a little tired of the term Tiger Team, but it's in the rearview mirror at this point. We have a very robust permitting Tiger Team that is focused on getting guidance out, building intake processes, building escalation strategies, so that where we have the ability to be persuasive with colleagues, we can do so. We're similarly working with states around, it is a NOFO requirement that they examine their legislative and regulatory environments for any impediments to speedy and efficient deployment of telecommunications infrastructure inside those states. And we anticipate getting a ton more support to our grantees, the state and territory governments, as well as subgrantees, around how to meaningfully engage with environmental and historic protection, with their state DOTs, with other federal land agencies. And we're going to do we are not a permitting agency. So there is a limit to the ability that NTIA has to affect permitting decisions at the local, state, or even federal level. But in each instance, we're going to do our best to support people in moving expeditiously through the permitting process, not skipping any steps, not getting any special treatment, but moving as quickly through that process as they possibly can, so that we can get the fiber on the poles and in the ground and the steel in the ground that we need to get folks connected.
The only thing I'd add is, because of our funds expiring at the end of 2026, it's definitely a hammer that's pushing states to move and push through these issues.
I think we have time for one more question. If anyone else has, sir.
The broadband materials business, you get bucket trucks.
When are they coming?
2024, and and we have a couple of boring rates. Also, the material supply is very, very challenging. And electronics, but the vast majority of these electronics assembled overseas, often with U.S. chips, Broadcom, but I just wanted to get a rundown of your thoughts on that, and Buy America related to materials.
I don't have a lot to say on Buy America other than what I said before, which is that we're going to balance out those two values that are in tension in the best way that we can and get really specific guidance out there. It is not going to be just only source everything in the United States. It's going to be a more nuanced approach than that. We also recognize that supply chain is going to create a significant issue. I mean, we're working across commerce very hard at attacking the supply side of the supply chain. I mean, that'll take a while to spin up, but hopefully a lot of these big projects will take a while to spin up. And so we're seeing significantly more production in the United States that'll come online very soon. We're also optimistic that there are going to be some secondary markets that are going to spring up for a lot of this stuff, as well as more nimble approaches to contracting in the subcontractor space, right? If there's a surplus of folks 100 miles away, can they just truck up the road? Is there a way for us to share those needs more broadly so that we can, at least as efficiently as possible, allow the market for talent and material to meet the demand that's out there for talent and material? And I think there's a lot of ingenuity that'll happen, by the way, outside of our governmental purview, right? I mean, I have a high confidence in effective private sector entities to be able to solve their problems in delivering expansions of their businesses.
That's the other reason why we're telling states to move fast, is we don't want our money and his money to hit the street at the exact same time. That will just exacerbate the pressure on the supply chain. Better that our money is spent now with the existing supplies that are out there, and then the BEAD money comes a little later. If you space them out in time, it won't put as much pressure on it.
All right. Well, Evan, Joey, we really appreciate you being here today and sharing
Thanks for having us.
the
Yeah,
latest
really
on your
appreciate it.
programs, and look forward to working with you.